Okay, it looks like the stream of attendees joining for now has slowed down to trickle, so I will get started. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you're in. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Dr. Jen Pfeifer. I am the co-director of the National Scientific Council on Adolescents. I'm a professor in psychology at the University of Oregon, where I'm also director of the Developmental Social Neuroscience Lab, and I am on the co-chairing the Leadership Council of the Ballmer Institute for Children's Behavioral Health at the University of Oregon. So, welcome. We're so excited you're here. Last week, the National Scientific Council released a report, a new council report on early adolescence and digital technology. And we're excited to have some of the leading authors here today to talk about how we can ensure that the online world helps middle school aged youth learn and thrive. So just a little housekeeping before we begin. We'll leave time for questions in the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar. You can add your questions through the Q&A function throughout the discussion. We'll get to them at the end. We'll be recording this panel discussion and we'll have it available on the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescents website after this session. So now I think we'll take this welcome slide down and move forward for the exciting discussion. When we're looking at digital media use, early adolescents from about ages 10 to 13 years, this is really important as youth are transitioning from childhood to adolescence at the same time that they're transitioning to a wider online world. During these years, we know that rapid changes in their bodies and brains at this time make young people especially sensitive to external social and emotional influences. So experiences and support that promote positive development and limit harm have a big impact during these years. We know that digital technology itself isn't either all good or all bad, but during early adolescence, its effects can be amplified. So this gives us an enormous opportunity to ensure that the online world where our kids spend so much of their time provides safe, engaging spaces for early adolescents to learn, to contribute, and to connect. And today, we'll talk about the kinds of standards and policies that research tells us can help our kids thrive in the online world. I'm joined today by several council members, Dr. Candice Odgers, who is co-director of the Connecting the EdTech Research Ecosystem Network at the University of California, Irvine, Dr. Jackie Nesi, who is leader at the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health at Brown University, Dr. Dahl, director of the Institute of Human Development at UC Berkeley, and Dr. Nick Allen, director of the Center for Digital Mental Health at the University of Oregon. I'm excited and grateful that you are all here today, so thank you. I'll let each of them say a little bit about themselves. Candice, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here today and talk about this really important topic. I'm a developmental psychologist who's done work in the digital tech space. And I would say that I care most about kids and evidence in mental health. And the digital tech is just this environment that we're increasingly seeing them move into that's become like a centerpiece of what we do as an important setting for kids. And so excited to talk about this report and the findings.
Thanks, Candice. Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jackie Nesi. I'm also excited to be here today and talk about this report. I'm a clinical psychologist, an assistant professor at Brown University in the Department of Psychiatry. I study the role of digital technology and social media in youth mental health. And I'm also the author of a weekly newsletter on technology, psychology, and parenting called Technosapiens. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Jackie. Ron?
Hi, I'm Randall. I'm excited to be here. I love when interdisciplinary teams come together around important real-world issues, and this is clearly one of them. As most of us are aware, it is the digital technology is the learning environment for so many aspects of learning that are occurring, as we'll be talking about. And having teams come together to think about the science, the evidence, and how to make practical suggestions and changes to have a positive impact is really inspiring to be part of. Thanks.
I agree. Thanks, Ron. And Nick, last but not least.
Thank you. Well, I will not say that I'm excited to be here, even though I am excited to be here, because I don't want to be too repetitive. My name's Nick Allen. I'm a clinical psychologist and professor at the University of Oregon. I'm really been interested in mental health in young people my entire career, and that's my main interest and passion. But recently, we've really been focusing on trying to understand the role that digital technology plays in that. And in particular, we're not only trying to understand the impacts of digital technology on young people's mental health, but also trying to learn about ways to use digital technology to improve the opportunities that young people have to get support for their mental health. And as part of that, I have a software startup company that's trying to build products that are going to be used in that context. But I am excited to be here, actually.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks so much to all of you for introducing yourselves. Let's get started. I am sure our attendees are really interested to interact with you all about the report. So Ron, let's start off with you. I have an almost 10-year-old, and I was wondering if you could tell us, share more about why we chose to focus on early adolescence for this report.
Yes, thanks. So I think there are a number of reasons, at least a few, that come together to highlight this as an important window of time. And in one part of this, I want to emphasize is it's a transition. It's whether we go from 10 to 13 or 9 to 14, it's a time of transition from childhood into adolescence, when young people often have kind of one foot in childhood and still has that aspects of their identity, but they're beginning to have another foot stepping into adolescence and exploring and wanting more autonomy and making their own decisions. And obviously, adolescence can cover from 10 to 24 by some definitions, and the issues are so different at each. But this transition from childhood into adolescence, the beginning of puberty, as you mentioned, changes in brain and body, and more sensitivity to social information and its importance and sorting out who we are, it is such an opportunity for formative learning. It's also when young people are increasingly exploring digital technology on their own. It's that increasingly they're getting their own phones. They're spending more time with less adult supervision, creating positive learning experiences, forming positive patterns of interacting with technology and seeing the advantages of those positive experiences is almost like an investment on a good trajectory, rather than waiting till mid to late adolescence when adults' abilities to influence or control or change what young people are doing becomes more and more difficult. So we really think this is a time of opportunity, and the science is just emerging that give us that the science is giving us a set of insights about ways to promote these positive learning and developmental experiences.
No, thanks, Ron. That's really, the positive frame is so important. And, again, I mentioned as a parent of an almost 10-year-old and thinking about the possibility that we could set youth on positive trajectories with digital technology is really, I think that's a relief, or should be a relief for parents. It should be positive. Anyone else want to add anything to that answer? About why we focused on early adolescence?
I would just add that it's the time where most kids get their first phone, and it's that hard question that parents have is kind of what's the right age? What are my kids' friends doing? And, so we wanted to weigh in on kind of what the science says and how that should inform that answer. And then what we know from the broader field of developmental science about how we can support kids to start, functioning in that new environment in a way that's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Candice, I'm going to put you on the spot again here. You have done a lot of research on the effects of digital technology use on this age group, and we hear a lot of negatives in the news about social media, but can you tell people what the research actually shows?
Yeah, so we've actually been tracking kids on their phones for over a decade. So before phones were really cool and most kids had them, we were using them as a research device just to try and understand what was happening in their daily lives, how their mental health was, what kind of experiences. And the questions that we got from parents at that time were around phones. Is it safe? Is it safe for my kid to get online? And we didn't know the answer, right? And so we started to kind of comb through the literature and collect data as we were following these kids. It was an unknown. So as a scientist, I was curious, right? So what is the effect of this new ecosystem and world having on kids? And as a parent, I was also panicked, right? So, you know, we're especially scared as our kids start to move through this period of early adolescence and change in all kinds of important ways. And so we've done a couple things. We've done our own studies where we've tracked kids and looked every day on their phones, what they're doing, what they're seeing, and then how they're feeling. And then we've scanned the larger literature. So we went through the studies of like hundreds of thousands of kids, or studies that have followed kids longitudinally. And if I had to summarize all that, I would say that, you know, I was surprised. I think people are surprised when I say this, shocked maybe, that there's not a lot of evidence to support at least big effects of digital technology on kids' mental health. Most of the studies report null effects, and the rest are this smattering of very tiny associations. And by tiny, we mean about less than 1% of the variation. And most of those studies really don't have the kind of design where we'd say kind of what causes what. So that was kind of the biggest takeaway. Now, I want to pause for a second, because when I say that, people, the next reaction is, well, are you saying we shouldn't study phones or worry about phones? And that's not the message here, right? Both of these things can be true. It can be true. This is not the major driver of the mental health epidemic, but this is still in a really important environment to understand, to make healthy. You know, kids are spending more time online than they are in a school in a given week. Many kids are. And so we need to start taking seriously, not just is it harmful, but how can we leverage these tools and these spaces kids are in. So I guess surprise, and then looking forward to seeing an opportunity of this new space that we could use to support kids.
Absolutely. Thanks for summarizing that. And I would agree. I think a lot of people are surprised. I know as co-authors of the report, we are all aware of that literature, but I think that you know, a contrary message is out there. So it is really good to share. Anyone else want to add to this kind of you know, depiction of the field in terms of what the research shows about the effects of digital technology use on early adolescence?
If you add, you're asked the next question.
Nick.
Oh, I've been warned. I think a thing that's really important to add to what Candice said is that there's still a lot of things that probably really matter that we don't know about this relationship. So, for example, not all of the research, but a lot of the research is based on questionnaires that we ask kids about how much time do you spend online. First of all, nobody's very good at estimating that, and including kids and adults. And secondly, it doesn't get into the question of what are they doing online. So I think that partly, in my opinion, the question, when you ask the question, does using digital technology or being online or screen time, is it harmful? It's a poorly formed question, because it's really about what's happening. There's an enormous variety of experiences that kids are having online, and we need to understand more about that so that we can understand, because it's likely, or at least I personally think it's likely, that some of them are harmful, a lot of them are pretty neutral, and some of them are great. And so we need to understand that difference. And to do that, we have to get a different kind of data than we've often had in these studies. So it is also a slightly complicated thing to get data on, because especially in this age group, we've found in our studies, this early adolescent age group, the kids are very privacy sensitive about what they're doing on their phones, because they've just got their first phone. And one of the things that's very compelling about this device is that this is a place where I can do things that my parents don't know about. And that's a really compelling feature of the phone. And so when we as researchers come and try and understand that, there's a natural tendency for them to feel that that's a pretty private thing and not something that they're super excited about sharing. But so I think I totally agree with Candice's summary. I think it's very much the view that I see as well, but there are some important questions we don't have answers to yet. And I think when we get them, we'll know a lot more about how to move forward.
I'll just build on that with one more comment. I think, I definitely agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think, when we ask these questions about how tech is influencing adolescents, we are usually asking these kind of main effects questions about how does, time, say, on social media or on digital technology broadly impact youth mental health. But I think, as Nick said, we know that it probably depends on what they're doing online. But it also depends on who they are. I think that there are such huge individual differences between adolescents. I think that certain teens come in with particular vulnerabilities or particular strengths that are going to impact both how they use the technology and how it impacts them. So I think that's just another piece of the puzzle to be thinking through. And part of that is going to come down to their age and their maturity level. And that's why this early adolescent period is especially important to consider, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I love the context you guys provided there. It's a really great overview for folks to understand, some of the big picture and also, a little bit of the nuances here. So Jackie, since you gave the second follow-up, I'm gonna turn it over to you here. So in the report, we make 4 general recommendations for the kinds of standards and policies for digital technology that could help middle school aged youth thrive. And the first one, which we've kind of talked a little bit about so far today, is that digital technology should support well-being. And Jackie, if you could kind of expand a little bit on how social media and other digital tech can actually be supportive for kids.
Yeah, so I think generally our approach with this report is that we really have this amazing opportunity through digital technology to support early adolescents and actually promote health and wellness at this really key point in their development. And so, I think as Ron spoke about, one way we can think about that is really centering some of these key developmental needs for youth in this age group. So things like, exploration and risk-taking, developing a sense of meaning and purpose, developing values and identity. And so, we know that at times, tech as it currently stands can create new challenges for some of those developmental needs, when kids are being exposed to age inappropriate content, if they're not getting the right support or scaffolding from adults in their engagement with these platforms, or they're encountering problematic experiences like cyberbullying or social rejection. But I think that, we also see a path for these digital spaces to really create new potential for early adolescents to thrive. So whether that's through new opportunities for parents to provide more support and involvement in youth's online lives, whether that's through safe opportunities for adolescents to practice creativity online or self-expression or explore their identities, to build confidence, or to connect, with peers in ways that actually enhance their relationships instead of driving them toward these more harmful social experiences.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Anyone else want to share some of the ways that they think social media or digital technology can support early adolescent development?
So again, agreeing with everything that's said, I want to come back to the positive frame about the kinds of learning we want young people to be having. So when we say things like exploration and risk-taking, sometimes people are thinking about the negative aspects of that, but so much, again, the literature and the science and the evidence, so much of the learning is trial and error learning about who am I in relation to other people and how do I contribute and where do I fit in and where do I belong? And technology and abilities to interact with your friends and other individuals is so fundamental to that experiential trial and error learning. But making errors is kind of painful in this, at any point in the lifespan, but particularly in early adolescence. And so how can we increase the likelihood that young people are experimenting in safe environments where it's okay to make some mistakes and learn from them, but not have harmful effects? And so I think in addition to wanting these environments to be safe and minimize the harm, thinking integrating the science and informing ways to create more positive learning experiences for young people to create, to interact, to discover aspects of what they like and how to contribute and be kind to others. Those learning experiences are also increasingly happening through, and they won't say that it's digital technology, they're just interacting with their friends. And so I think this broadening the way we're conceptualizing social learning and promoting positive social learning experiences the evidence base for that may be as important as how do we protect children from the really bad things.
I would just add that the other thing we know is that increasingly adolescents are going online to learn about mental health issues and learn how to get help for themselves and for other people. And so this is also an opportunity for us to have the right kind of resources, platforms in place when they're going to those spaces. The other thing that's been interesting across a number of studies now is that individuals who are experiencing the highest levels of mental health need are the most likely to go online to seek those things out. And so this is, again, coming back to Nick and Jackie's idea around, like, it really depends on who the kid is that's entering into these systems in terms of what they're looking for and what they're going to get in those online spaces.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to shake things up here, and this topic has come up in some of these responses so far. I mean, we're emphasizing that we want ways for early adolescents to learn and explore safely and have the ability to reach out and make these connections or find communities or find information that they need. But a word that we've used a couple of times already and that parents are especially concerned about is safety. So we make recommendations that focus on safety of early adolescents. Nick, could you talk to us for a bit about how do we reduce risks in digital spaces for early adolescents?
Yeah, it's a good segue from what we were just talking about, actually. And I think, when thinking about the concept of safety, I want to reemphasize the point that Ron just made, which is that, adolescence, life in general, but adolescence and early adolescence in particular, does involve a certain amount of challenge and sometimes painful learning that comes from failure and things like that. So, we do want to allow digital spaces to be used for that kind of exploration and learning and social connection. So one of the ways I personally frame up this issue of safety is to ask, what are the particular features of the online environment that may be exacerbating or increasing the kinds of risks that young people are exposed to? So let's take, the social media and the smartphone is primarily, especially in the hands of young people, a device for social communication and social connection. And we know that peer relationships in this group have always been a source of both great joy and fun, but also risks for experiences like bullying and rejection and so forth that are more harmful. So the question you have to ask looking at the digital space is that, how is it designed? Is it designed in a way that actually makes that offline risk, that, if you like, pretty normal experience of adolescence, somehow more harmful? And I think there's a couple of ways in which it can, and therefore we need to look at it from a design point of view. One of them is how young people's data is handled. And some people may have heard the concept of the right to be forgotten. So the idea that when you put information online, you have a right to withdraw it and take it back, or maybe by design it disappears, a little bit like with Snapchat, where you send a communication that is ephemeral and disappears after a period of time. One of the particular risks associated with the online environment is if you post something that's embarrassing or that becomes a target of bullying or something like that, it can become a digital artifact that, if you like, goes viral, that can be shared widely, that gets out of your control in a way that it normally wouldn't. So one of the important points that we make in the report is that we think that these data that belong to young people really need to be handled in a different way, and this right to be forgotten really needs to be strongly emphasized in the design of digital products. So that's one emphasis. The other emphasis that I'll just mention is we actually feel that the business models that sit behind digital products actually matter quite a bit in terms of how the products are designed and what they're motivating the user to do. And a particular concern of ours was the targeted advertising business model, which is the fundamental business model of the online world. And, we can see that there's, certain justifications that may apply for that business model with older people, but that there may be a different calculus that applies when you're talking about younger people, because essentially what the business model does of targeted advertising is it says that I, as the digital media company, want as much of your data about your usage of the site as I can, so that then I can inform targeted advertising directed at you. And I think some of the arguments about the autonomy of the user aren't as strong when you're talking about younger people. And there are other and so what happens is that this business model tends to encourage designs that make the product very sticky, that people want to stay on it for a long period of time. And that has the impact of making some of these social experiences more ubiquitous and more difficult. For example, experiencing bullying online late at night when you're very tired and you don't have any peer or parental context to process that might be a very different experience from experiencing exactly the same thing during the day. So products that are designed to sort of keep kids online for that long period of time may be exacerbating that risk. And so that's where we think the business models need to be looked at. And one suggestion that we have is that for younger people, a different business model than the targeted advertising one might be a more appropriate one for promoting ultimately design of products to be more safe. For example, a subscription model or a freemium model where there's a free level of use with a paid level of use above that may be much more appropriate. And we suggest that something that should be explored is whether targeted advertising models should be limited to older individuals.
Thanks so much, Nick. I'll let the panelists think for a minute. I just want to extend a few things you said. So one thing that attendees might want to know is that when the National Scientific Council on Adolescents pulls together these reports, we always try to engage youth in them. And so this was true with our first council report. Here, because the focus was on early adolescence, we did interviewing with youth in early adolescence and found some really interesting things, not only related to safety, but some of your comments made me think of this. And, for example, we detail a little bit in the report about this kind of maybe mixed status of their understanding of how their data is being used, whether it's being collected, when they may have these ideas that their data is being collected, but they actually don't. They have a different grasp than what is the reality. And so I think it's really interesting and important to also think about ways that we can support better understanding of these topics that are related to digital technology for youth to increase our safety. And then another thought that I had that, it comes up when you talk about the stickiness of some of these apps is how it can impact other processes that are really changing a lot during adolescence, like sleep. And I'm wondering if anyone wants to just give a little nugget about digital technology use in sleep here in adolescence.
We're all looking at Ron, who's the sleep expert. So
there's a lot of sleep expertise on this in this panel. A number of us have been interested. So I think the first thing that I would shine a light on in terms of sleep and the concerns that is one area where, especially in mid and later adolescence, that it can exacerbate challenges and interfere with sleep. I would emphasize that early adolescence is a time for promoting healthy habits. And so if we are thinking about, as we have been in a more nuanced way, how to help young people make decisions and encourage them to make decisions that may be part of healthy habits, then recognizing the importance of sleep and minimizing or the maladaptive tendencies to be up really late, to be, anxious or worried, and then feel like you need to be connected and socially, like it becomes a slippery slope to patterns of behavior that are likely to be interfering with optimal sleep. And so once again, this ability for younger adolescents to still be influenced by adults, parents, teachers, adults, and try different ways of getting what they want, interactions and social interactions and places to explore, but do it in ways that may also be aligned with healthy habits. I think sleep is a place where promoting a more balanced approach, both from the design of the spaces, as Nick's referring to, but also in terms of advice and suggestions and guidelines to recognize that late night, especially the kinds of activities that naturally pull motivation in automatically and tap into worries and anxieties, those are likely to be a pathway to more problematic use of technology.
Thanks, Ron. Other thoughts from the other panelists about other elements of safety? There are quite a few more fine-grained recommendations that we make. If anyone wants to share or expand on some of those.
Well, one other recommendation I would emphasize is that, when you think about the world that opens up to you when you get your first personal smartphone, there's a remarkably small amount of preparation we provide for most young people to enter into that world. And there is a real opportunity for education to be part of the introduction of this technology. And some of that could happen in schools, some of it can happen in families, some of it can happen in the media, some of it could happen on the phone itself. And but it really is a remarkable, just think about all the things you can get on a smartphone these days. And at 12 or 11 or sometimes 10 or younger year old is given this and said, here we go. All the wonderful and terrible things in the world are there available for you. And so education is really, we think, a very important part of the solution here too. And we need to work out how to disseminate that effectively.
Thanks, Nick. Okay. I think that's, we've raised some really important considerations for safety. We've also highlighted that we don't need to be laser focused just on the negatives, but also the potential for opportunity. And I think when you kind of put those two together, you also need to be really mindful about equity considerations. So Candice, the report also recommends that digital technology be designed to support equity. Like, how does tech affect different groups differently? What are some considerations there?
Yeah, this is a big and important question. And we know that new technologies can actually amplify inequalities, and that's what they tend to do. And unfortunately, the work that we and others have done on the digital divide, that's what we've seen happen. And so I'm going to take it back to one of Nick's points, is that this support or lack of support as kids make this entry into the digital world, we find that that's actually stratified by social class, right? So we do the big surveys, and these surveys happen kind of all over the world. And you see time and time again, the kids are in lower resourced families and schools are receiving less kind of guidance around safety, but also less tailoring of kind of the opportunities and the, for example, educational app tailoring that might happen. And so what you have is children getting a very different onboarding or very different level of supervision in these spaces. And the result of that is when we talk with kids or we follow kids, we see that those young people report more problems online, and that offline risk tends to be the biggest predictor of encountering online risks. So what can we do about that? Nick mentioned a couple of things around kind of education and families, but we've also called on digital technology companies to come into the public square here and make some of these safety options embedded by default. right? And to not suggest that children are not on their platforms because they have an age of 13, right? But to recognize what we all know is kids are there, and that we need to design these features in ways that take some of the onus off the parents. There was a great question in the chat from Charles saying, you know, how do we keep up as parents? It's an impossible task to keep up with the guidelines and the regulations. And it's an impossible task if you're in a family that has two working parents, that has limited time and resources to kind of invest in supervising this model. So, you know, that's kind of the first point. And the second point is that there's this really tricky issue where some of the groups, the LGBTQ community, for example, that report finding safe spaces in online worlds that are not necessarily available in their offline communities, right? So those are providing some of the biggest benefits and affordances, but minoritized and marginalized communities are also at the greatest risk for experiencing harassment and victimization online, right? So understanding kind of what you're looking for when you're coming into these spaces, what kids can get and benefit from the situations, but those same populations may be at the greatest risk for harm as well, right? And so this is where we need to, as a community, as psychologists, as parents, you know, as digital tech designers and companies, really start to think carefully about what can we build in to these environments as safety features, right, for all kinds of populations, not just the typical user.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Candice. Thanks. Does anyone else want to expand on equity considerations? Okay. Well, we actually have had a number of questions already start streaming in. That this is obviously a very engaging topic. So this is fantastic because we will have time here to move to some questions. And if we get through them all, I have lots on my mind to ask as well. So yeah, I know Candice already, if you're attending the webinar, you want to add some questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I will finish with Chuck's second question, which, you know, you addressed this first question about how researchers and parents can keep up with the rapid and ever-changing landscape of social media apps. But I think maybe folks would like to hear our thoughts about how parents can best monitor what our kids view online. So how do we strike a balance between keeping them safe? And I love this question, while also respecting and fostering their growing autonomy. When we think about these are core developmental tasks, and thinking about digital technology use as an opportunity to develop self-regulation skills and things like that. But how do we do this well as a parent? Anyone want to jump in first?
I'll jump in. I think, you know, this is such a tricky question, and I certainly don't think there's one right answer here. A few points I'll make. One is that I think that, as we've said previously, I think it can't all be on the parents. I do think that, you know, as we've discussed, I think these spaces, these digital spaces do need to be designed with youth in mind, and the fact that youth are seeking out more autonomy and independence online. And it's important to have some safeguards there for them. In terms of parenting, the first thing I would say is just communication. I think that you know, with monitoring, I think there's a few different pieces of it, and one piece could be actually viewing what our kids are doing online, and that is, I think, necessary in some cases and for certain ages. But I think that really can't happen in a vacuum. It has to happen with open communication, with rationale for why we're doing that, with education about the kinds of risks that and benefits that adolescents might encounter online, and sort of openness to discussing some of the pros and cons of these spaces with our kids.
I think I don't want to be too pessimistic about this point, but I think it's important for parents to be aware that in an ultimate sense, you don't know and you can't know. And so this is where, and there are a couple of reasons for that, but this is where I strongly endorse Jackie's point about the importance of communication. Because I think having the kind of relationship with your child where they will speak to you about their experiences online, particularly ones that they might find confusing or scary or negative in some way, is at the end of the day your best tool. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't make sensible efforts to understand what your kids are doing online, but also you need to understand the limits of that kids are using new products all the time. So you may got them off their account on one social media site and you don't even know about the new social media site that the kids are on now, you know. So that's one issue. You know, and kids are very motivated, as I said before, to keep this private. It actually feels like a space that's private from parents for them, and that's something they value quite highly. So, you know, just to give you another example, there was a study done by a big research study called the ABCD study. It was published. It was comparing parents' estimates of how much kids are online, the kids' own estimates of how much they were online, to an objective measure drawn from the phone of how much they were online. And the kids' report of how much they were online correlated a bit with the objective data. The parents' estimate didn't correlate at all, 0. So my point is, it's not a point, I'm not trying to say give up, but I also think have reasonable expectations of the limitations of what you can achieve here, and trying to achieve this by controlling or overseeing the kids' phone use is really, really hard, and in often cases not viable. And it's a much better to be putting your efforts into that communication and openness around the topic. And the more you can achieve there, that's probably your best bet, in my opinion.
I have a more optimistic view than Nick. Can I bring it up a bit? So the way that I've often thought about this is that it isn't much different than when our kids walk out the door and they're in school or they're at, you know, the park with their friends. We don't see it, right? And we don't see it, and we can't see it all. And so the strategies that we need to use to find out who they're with, what they're doing, how they felt about it, you know, those we kind of know those skills. And so this is like good news for parents that this isn't an entirely new thing. We need to apply some of these skills that we've done here. But the other thing that digital tech does, it does leave a digital trace. And in these cases, it can be helpful, you know, for parents or for peers working with kids to understand like what your kids are exploring, right? What they're exploring online. And maybe that's you going into those spaces with them. It's a game or whether it's a social media site to start the conversation. The digital world actually gives us, it opens up some more risks to be sure, but it does provide some opportunities to get some insights into kind of what they're seeking when they go to those spaces, if we take the time to kind of go there with them or to try and follow up with what they're seeing, how they're feeling, or what they're doing. So there's a little bit more information than some of these other contexts that we let our children eventually go into by themselves.
I want to lean into the more optimistic view and raise the earlier issues that, again, it's the yin and the yang here, that about the equity issues and the more marginalized and youth having fewer opportunities and not wanting to put so much on the parents. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed as we were writing this report and talking about how to balance these things and give advice and have it be evidence-based, you know, is the metaphors we came up with, like a virtual playground. Like, obviously you can't make a completely safe playground, but of course, who would not think that you shouldn't have some regulations that, you know, you can't rely always on parents. And I think the other metaphor that comes up is like, we wouldn't just let someone get into a car because they, you know, were a certain age and start driving it. And it gets back to this point, the power of having a smartphone and how to create structure that may help young people adapt to and have positive learning experiences for this huge shift to what set of opportunities and exploration can occur. And ideally, we hope that trusted adults and parents and you know, caring individuals are going to, it's about communication. It's what Jackie said, it's what Nick said. And I think we all feel that industry and structure can help the scaffolding, help balance some of these risks of suddenly relatively young children, just early in adolescence, who may not have adults in their lives who can help them with this transition and monitor. How do we make it a bit safer and more likely to have these positive learning experiences for those individuals? And I think these are challenges for the field, and it's part of what made it exciting to try to put all this into a report about what do we know and what is the research that we really need and what are the things that need to be tried that could have a positive impact in these spaces.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing some of those elements up into the discussion, Ron. Again, the Q&A is flowing. I'm gonna bounce around kind of conceptually here and say, I feel like this is related to a question that Erin poses, saying that, often, and we mentioned this in the report, when spaces for early adolescents or children are created, they're perceived as babyish, and they're not actually attractive to that segment. How do we get the main players and designers to step meaningfully into this conversation and dedicate resources to creating spaces that are designed for well-being, spaces that youth actually want to go instead of just where parents want them to? And, how, maybe could hear from some of the panelists about, what they've seen from corporations in terms of stepping up in this way. Anyone want to take that? I know people can.
Well, I'll continue to serve my role as the pessimist on the group in the sense that I think we need to be aware that adults have a really terrible track record of trying to design things that speak powerfully to young people. And whenever we try to do something that's cool and hip and neat, we always wind up doing these things like the questioner asked that, can either look babyish or pandering or something like that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but I think it's a cautionary tale that we should know that our ability to build something that speaks directly to youth culture and that youth find relevant and really engaging is often quite limited. And, what are the things that young people find most compelling online? It's the content that's created by other young people, right? That's what influencers are, on Instagram and TikTok. It's what on YouTube, the content that young people tend to be most interested in is created by people who are peers or what we call near peers. So people maybe a little bit older than them, that they're aspiring to join that group soon. And so I think, to my mind, the way I would frame the question is, how do we work with the creators and content creators amongst the young people to help them to create content that's really positive and affirming and beneficial? Because I think when we try to design this stuff as old folks, we often miss the mark pretty badly. And now someone can be more optimistic.
All right, I'll do it. So the Center for Science and Storytellers at UCLA has done this really great work with industry. And these are typically kind of major film industry when they're releasing a film that touches on mental health content, for example. They've been experimenting with having second screen content. So we know that most kids are watching the content, but they're also doing something else, maybe on social media or chatting with friends. And so there are new opportunities opening up to both deliver content about mental health issues. They've done some nice studies that have shown that if it's delivered in a certain way with peer-to-peer contact, that kids, when they are surveyed later, become kind of express more knowledge about mental health and follow up and do some research on mental health, in fact, after the show. So there's kind of new models, I think, for engagement. And that was something, again, that was like, they have a youth advisory panel. I think the key thing you're talking about, Nick, is having youth involved, not just at the end as testing, does this work, but from the beginning of like, where are kids, where are young people, what do they want, is kind of the first level. And then I'm also seeing this in the EdTech industry that, you know, a lot of EdTech companies, the questions that they're getting from parents and teachers are not in their learning apps. It's not just about teaching math and reading. It's about supporting social emotional learning within that context. So again, these are a bit younger populations, but that need, we're just seeing it come through all sectors from the school system and beyond. So now what the business model is for that and whether it sells, I think that's where your concern is, Nick, and mine also.
If I could just add something here that comes up in the report and that your responses made me think of. One of the things that you mentioned, Nick, is that that the most influential type of content or the content that the youth want to engage with is that created by other youth. And one of the things we heard about from several of the youth that we interviewed is this idea that they wanted spaces that were their own, that were safe. So what they were saying is, we started by asking them some questions about age limits, like you need to be 13 and up to use this and how they thought about it. And they said, well, what we really want are age maximums. We want these spaces that are safe. We don't want old people. I won't share their definition of old people because it makes us all feel extremely senior, but that they wanted their own safe spaces. And I do think that that's tractable to say that can be, possibly, or could be one route. So I'm curious to hear about, we discussed a little bit about the difficulties of age verification, but, what about this age minimums, age maximums? Does anyone want to kind of briefly tackle that?
Well, Jeff, briefly, I think it's a great point, and for some younger adolescents, what they'd really like is a space that's just for them, and so forth. The technical challenge here is age verification, and this is something where, just let me be clear, it's not an easy challenge, and this is where we need frankly, in my opinion, some of the best technical minds working with developmentalists and other people who think about these things to see what models might work in this context. But as we know, there's this theoretical idea that you're meant to be 13 to have accounts on certain social media sites that's, honoured in the breach, as they say. It's barely observed because, and so I think the concept's right. I think age verification is I think there are some potential solutions. They're not easy, but this is where industry and academia could work together really to make some quite big differences if we could find tractable ways to approach this issue of age verification that actually worked.
I also think there's some innovative work going on. I'll just give you one tiny example that I think many people are familiar with. Is like there are a lot of innovative approaches to creating kid-friendly Minecraft servers where they have a different set of criteria and rules, or the space is designed for certain groups of young people to come together, even around a theme or an issue that they may have been dealing with. And so I think this creative promotion of virtual spaces for young people to come together that has enough of the structural safety, and then young people have some autonomy in that, and there's some monitoring or some modulation role. There's, I think, some really interesting experiments in that space. It's not that something that we can just pass legislation and regulate, but I think there's a lot of innovative work exploring ways to create these positive environments. And so I think that, again, we need a community of researchers and developmentalists and advocates thinking in creative ways about promoting these positive spaces that young people want, as you described.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I'm going to try and merge two questions because we're almost out of time here. Just try to get a question and response in here between Mariah's question and Maria's question, coming all the way from Peru. But there's these questions about sort of using social media for identity construction, using it for civic expression online. How do we support that kind of engagement in a positive manner? Does anyone want to I think that's a really nice positive note to end on today. Would anyone like to answer that?
So I'll start and see if this sparks reaction, positive or negative. But I think the one key thing we've been talking about here and throughout the report is having it youth driven, right? And so a lot of the curriculum focus, traditional curriculum is top down. And in many educational settings, these are viewed as opportunities to see kind of what's emergent from what the kids actually want. So as researchers, we'll often think, let's design a space or a program or intervention, and it's all evidence-based and it works in our lab, but it doesn't work in the world because kids aren't there, or young people are not there, families are not there. And so my first suggestion would be to do a work group, do a design group with the community you want to serve, right? To have those ideas in terms of even the simple questions, like whether they want to be on Discord or whether they're, want to be on some other platform. Those are critical. I mean, it's the comfort level of that community. And the more you can go into spaces where young people and their families already are interacting, the more successful those kind of exchanges are going to be, right? And then the youth-led part is the other important piece of this, right? So having them drive what they identify. We all look at the, youth climate is one example, right? So we think this generation is completely consumed with climate, but when we actually survey them, that's not where they fall out on their concerns, right? So as adults, we're concerned about youth's concerns about climate and we hold it really high, but kind of recent surveys are telling us that kids are not being drawn to that kind of content or conversation in the same way we would expect, right? So there's some assumptions that we're making as adults, and I would just say to check those assumptions and let those be generated by the specific community.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah, and I think also this intersects a little bit. Your answer kind of relates to Lucia's question about the value, on the one hand, youth-driven, as you're pointing out, really importantly, but also some spaces where these can be kind of co-informed, bringing families in where parents are connecting and sharing what they're seeing or connecting and co-inhabiting these spaces together with the early adolescents. So there are more questions here than we had time to answer, which I apologize for. There are some excellent questions in here. There are a lot more resources available, and as we wrap up here, what I want to do is just let people know we'll be sending an email with links to the resources that have come up in our discussion today. If you have any questions, you can absolutely reach out. Just on behalf of the National Scientific Council on Adolescents and the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent, we're just really grateful that you chose to spend an hour of your time with us today. And we hope that we've shared some meaningful insights for you, whether you're a researcher or a parent or a policymaker. You will be able to access this video from the session and other resources like the report directly on the Center for Developing Adolescent website later this week. And the link is actually also available in the chat. Feel free to contact our communications director, Megan Forder. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, panelists.